Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to session 4 and 5 of our Easter intensive course. So today we are looking at, I'll share my screen with you so you can see. We are looking at language techniques and ambitious vocabulary and literature model answers and mark schemes. Okay, so going on to our language techniques. I'm just going to bring this up on my folder. Oh, it's all pinging at me today. So we've got where's it gone? Oh, it's because I'm in the wrong folder. That's why. Okay, texts. Here we go. And language techniques. Okay. So I'm going to talk you through them. You probably know all of them, and you are probably sick to the back teeth of hearing about them. But I'm going to go through each of them just in case, just to make sure that you're really clear on what they all are and what they mean and how to implement them effectively, because there's no point in putting something in thinking I've put in loads of language techniques, and then you find out that actually you've maybe muddled them up a little bit. And I've also got a few little things that kind of help you remember which one's which. So, language techniques. You should be able to write about key language features used in novels, short stories, plays, and poems. And here's a reminder of what they are and how they work. So, alliteration. Think about the L. So, alliteration. This is where the first letter of a word is repeated in words that follow. For example, the cold, crisp crust of clean, clear ice. So, alliteration is the first letter that is repeated. Assonance is the one that's a pain in the ass. That's how I remember it, because it's not where it rhymes, sounds the same in the ends or the beginnings of the words. It's right in the middle. So this is where the same vowel sound is repeated, but the consonants are different. For example, he passed her a sharp, dark glance. She shot a cool, foolish look across the room. So you've got the R sound and the oo sound, but obviously they don't sound the same until you actually sort of really sort of like analyze it. So that's something to keep an eye out for, and something that a lot of people miss, and it's one of the ones that really show that you know what you're talking about. So if you think of it as being the same sounds, anything with your language techniques that is the same sounds, you've got alliteration is the first letter, and assonance is the pain in the ass, that's the middle bit that rhymes, okay, or the middle bit that sounds the same. That's how I remember it anyway. Colloquial language. So I did actually talk about this in, I think it was lesson 2 or 3, I can't remember. And I was saying it's basically kind of chatty, relaxed, doesn't have to be in full sentences, but you would not use colloquial language in a letter to the government or something like that, or to an employer or an employee even. Colloquial language would be used in questions such as write an article for a magazine website, or write an article for a gossip column or something like that. So it's about that kind of chatty, hey mate, kind of friendly, informal is the appropriate language terminology there. Colloquial. And it says this is language used in speech with an informal meaning. For example, chill, out of this world, take a rain check. So if you're using things like little sayings and phrases as well, that's something that is colloquial. Dialect. This is a version of a language spoken by people in a particular geographical area. So for example, Waiapet is from Newcastle. You wouldn't hear someone from Tring, like me, go, Waiapet. That would sound really weird. Now, it's not a different language, but it almost is a sort of add-on of certain words to the English language for that particular area. Dialogue is obviously a conversation between 2 or more people. You can definitely use that, referring to that with regard to your plays and things like that. Dissonance. This is a discordant combination of sounds. So it's combinations. This is discordant combinations of sounds. See, I didn't read it properly there. For example, the clash, spew, and slow pang of grinding waves against the quay. Then we've got enjambment. This is device used in poetry where a sentence continues beyond the end of the line or verse. This technique is often used to maintain a sense of continuation from one stanza to another. Enjambment. So this is a device used in poetry where a sentence continues beyond the end of the line or verse. This technique is often used to maintain a sense of continuation from one stanza to another. So the way I always look at this is if it gets to the end of a sentence or the end of a line in a poem and there is no punctuation at the end of the line, think of a little leg being there. And the reason I think this is jambe is French for leg, okay? So enjambment, jambe means leg. So if you think of it as being a little leg on the end of the line, if there's no punctuation, then you're going to remember that's enjambment, and it means that there's a longer thought process. That's kind of, it's usually about kind of either the author is taking their time or they are, you'll probably find that there's a contrasting sentence before or after, or maybe even caesura, which is like in the middle of the line. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, if you think of enjambment, jambe is French for leg. Think of a little leg at the end of the sentence if there's no punctuation, and that will remind you it's enjambment and it's about a long thought or a longer sentence, longer idea. Okay, hyperbole. Really annoying that it's spelt hyperbole, but yes, hyperbole. So it's a way of really exaggerating. Okay, so instead of saying this poet exaggerates something, initially you can say that they're using hyperbole. When you come to write in your essays, try not to repeat yourself, even if it is identifying certain language techniques. If you can find other ways, so you might say the poet uses hyperbole when they are referring to the sky by using explosive clouds and torrential, horrendous rain. That's hyperbole. Whereas if you said the I can't remember what I said now, the explosive clouds are exaggerated, and then they further exaggerate the horrendous rain. You're repeating that exaggerated again. You don't want to have the same word used more than once in one paragraph. And where possible, you don't want to use the same word ever again in your essay if you can help it. Don't stress too much about that. Don't let that trip you up and delay you. Write it anyway, and then when you go back to check, replace it. I always think of it as upgrading that word. So just replace it. So if you've got hyperbole, then obviously use hyperbole 100%. And then if you're coming to look at discussing it and analysing it, you can say things like this exaggeration shows blah, 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 blah. Imagery, this is where strong pictures or ideas are created in the mind of the reader. Similes, metaphors, and personification can all be used to achieve this. They all compare something real with something imagined. So if you've got a simile or a metaphor, or personification even, it could also be, it's not always, but it could also be imagery. So you can use that same example to identify both of those things. You're not repeating yourself. That's fine. You can do that. Irony. This is where words or ideas are used humorously or sarcastically to imply the opposite of what they mean. Okay. I'm trying to think of an example of this. I think Eric in An Inspector Calls, he says a couple of things that are a bit sarcastic. So he definitely uses irony. He says, I can't remember what the exact quote is, but it's something like, oh yes, well you would, wouldn't you? And that kind of thing. That's what you would label as irony, even though we know it's sarcasm. You can put in that it's sarcasm, but just get irony in there, because that's the difference between you getting more marks for what they call technical accuracy, or just marks for vocabulary. Yeah, so you want to get that technical accuracy in there as well. A metaphor, this is where a word or phrase is used to imply figurative resemblance, not a literal or actual one. For example, he flew into the room when actually he just like stepped into the room very quickly. Monologue. An uninterrupted monologue can show a character's importance or state of mind. So a monologue can be done when it's usually just a big piece of text, to be honest, that's spoken by one person. And that can be performed when other people are on stage. It can be when they're on their own. But if a character is on their own on stage or in a scene, that is called a soliloquy. And the convention is that in a soliloquy, they tell the truth. Okay, so for example, is this a dagger which I see before me? That speech could be seen as a monologue because he speaks it on his own, and it could be spoken when other people are there. That's fine, but there isn't anybody else there. He's there on his own just before he's about to kill Duncan. So that would count as a soliloquy, which means that what he is saying is what he believes to be the truth. Onomatopoeia. This is a word that sounds like the noise it's describing. For example, slash, bang, pop, hiss. Oxymoron. This is where two words normally not associated, are brought together. So, for example, cold heat and bittersweet. And the way I remember this is if you think of them being against each other, because they're not together, they're sort of against each other, they're opposites. I was thinking of a bit of an argument. So I say to myself, don't be a moron, agree with each other. So that tells me they're not agreeing with each other and they're the opposite. So oxymoron is someone being a moron. They're not agreeing. Therefore, it's two things that don't agree with each other and they're opposite. It might be a bit of a convoluted way of remembering it, but that's just how I do it. Pathos. This is language that evokes feelings of pity or sorrow. So instead of you saying this bit is really sad or this bit is very sentimental or, this section makes us as an audience feel a lot of empathy, we can say, for example, Eva Smith in An Inspector Calls, we can say that Priestley uses pathos in the death of Eva Smith to make the family feel more guilty. If she hadn't had such a tragic story, a story that was made up of so much pathos, we wouldn't have the same emotional investment in that play. Personification, this is where a human quality is attributed to a thing or idea. For example, the moon calls me to her darkened world. Repetition, this is where a word or phrase is repeated to achieve a particular effect. So this is noticed in, for example, it's really highlighted a lot in the poem London. I think it's the one by William Blake. Correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly London in your anthologies. And it says, and in every cry of every man, in every something, and in that particular example, in every, there's this feeling of relentlessness going on and on. And the fact that it's every, when there's repetition, it is always about emphasizing that point. So any repetition is good there. There's a really good what's the word, example of someone using that in a speech. So if you get asked to write a speech in your views and opinions language paper, then repetition is brilliant to use, and politicians use it all the time. There's a really good example of Tony Blair, who was leader of the Labour Party some years ago, and one of his rally speeches, he says words to the effect of, there are three things that are the top of our list when we hope to come into power, and that is education, education, and education. And obviously that doesn't make sense. That's three different, he's saying there are three things and they're not three different things, they're three things are the same. But by emphasizing the fact that there are those three things are using the same word, emphasizes the importance of education in their manifesto and in their objective to get the audience on side and get those voters voting for them, because they believe that's the thing that needs the most attention at that time. So if you go on to Google and type, or YouTube, and type in Tony Blair I think it's in Manchester. So Tony Blair, education, education, and education. And it should come up. There's a little clip that's just a few seconds that literally just has that bit. Rhyme. So poems often have a fixed rhyme scheme. For example, sonnets have 14 lines with a fixed rhyme scheme: A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Try to comment on what contribution the rhyme scheme is making to the text as a whole. Why do you think that the poet has chosen it? Does it add control or perhaps imitate the ideas in the poem in some way? So, for example, in your war poems, there are quite a lot of poems about soldiers, and in quite a few of those, there's almost like a regimented rhythm. And that can definitely, you can use that to say that that could, always say that could instead of it does, so that could suggest or could signify the beating of the marching, that feeling of marching like a soldier. I would say that when it comes to rhyme and rhythm, I know I was sort of talking about rhythm there a little bit more, but with rhyme as well, they kind of go hand in hand. You basically, you kind of have two kind of options when it comes to rhythm and rhyme. And usually, if you've got a steady rhythm, there's usually a steady rhyme as well, a predictable rhyme. And usually when there's a higgledy-piggledy rhythm, there's also a free rhyme schemes there, or no rhyme scheme. And this is usually for one of two things. One, if it's all higgledy-piggledy and not predictable, it shows either being not safe, feeling the character in there not feeling safe, not feeling at rest, and feeling maybe feelings of confusion, or it could be an intense feeling that has taken over their body and kind of like blown their senses out of the water kind of thing, just kind of like put them on the back foot, not quite thinking clearly. Okay, so quite often if someone has been through, if they're described in a poem as marching and they're firing guns and then they get hit, you might have a regular rhythm and a regular rhyme scheme, and then from the moment that they get hit, all of a sudden it all changes and there's no rhyme scheme, or the rhythm is all over the place, or the sentence structure suddenly changes. And that's to signify the change in mentally what's going on. Equally, if someone's trying to educate, so if there's somebody that I remember one of the poems in the IGCSE anthology was about a father giving advice to his son, and it's very regimented like this the whole way through. It literally sounds like that. All the words are almost monosyllabic all the way. Monosyllabic is a good word. If it's mono is one, syllabic, syllable, one syllable. So it's like, I went to the shop. So that's monosyllabic. So if they do that, that's usually because they're trying to educate, they're trying to patronize sometimes, or sometimes teach or be clear about something. So yeah, so if you just to really just reiterate that, make that clear for you, in both cases with rhythm, if the rhythm is all over the place, it's usually to show confusion or an intense feeling, or something's not quite right. It's to make you feel a little bit uneasy because things are unpredictable. But if the rhythm is regimented and clear, it's predictable. We know what's coming as the reader. It makes us feel safe. It could also be boring. So if someone's trying to show that something's really boring, monotonous, it could be like that. And it could be, so for example, in the poem, again, in the poem London, with that rhythm is going through it quite a lot, and it shows the relentlessness, the fact that this awful situation for the Londoners is never going to stop. It just keeps going, and that's what that rhythm could signify. And then with the rhyming, it's the same thing. So if the rhyme is predictable, then it's usually to show it's either safe or boring or never ending. And if it's unpredictable, it's to show that it is either very free or very confusing, or very what's the word, unnerving. Okay, it's done to make you not quite know how to read it properly, because that's the feeling that the poet is trying to create in you. That's the effect that language technique has on the reader. And that's what's going to get you your higher marks, not just identifying them and saying, oh, well, this is a metaphor, this is a simile. And by doing this, they're trying to create the vision of the sun or whatever it is they're trying to do. You need to go that step further and say, yes, this metaphor does identify the sun as being a metal plate, which shows, demonstrates how hot it is and makes the reader feel the intensity of the heat. But then the effect of that, by doing that, the poet is allowing the reader to feel like they are experiencing what the protagonist in the poem is feeling, protagonist being main character. So, you know, so you just, so there's kind of like four steps there. So the first one is you identify the language technique. The second one is you support your answer. The third thing is you say what that means, why have they done that? And then the fourth part of the answer is, and what effect does that have on the reader? And that right there, that effect one is everything. I can't hammer that home enough to you. So then we've got simile. So simile is almost exactly the same as a metaphor, except with a metaphor, you don't have the words like, as, or than. Than is another one. So if you have hotter than the sun, so my drink was hotter than the sun. The snake was like a stick laying dead. The what's the other one? As loud as a lion. Okay, so if you've got the word as or like, it's a simile, it's similar to something. A metaphor would say a loud lion, so she was a loud lion, rather than she was as loud as a lion. It doesn't mean that they're saying she is literally a lion. It is a metaphor, it is a comparison. Okay, so that's the difference. Your metaphor, something is something, and a simile is something is similar to something, so has like, as, or than. Symbolism. Objects, colours, sounds, and places may work as symbols. They can sometimes give us an insight into the themes. So snakes are often symbols of temptation, as in the story of Adam and Eve. White usually symbolises innocence, and a ringing bell can be a symbol for impending doom. Okay, just a little side note here. The reason that a bell is indicated as impending doom is because it's two reasons. Number one, they used to, apparently many moons ago, have a bell on the side of a grave, because so many people were buried and they thought they were dead and they weren't, because they didn't know how to assess it properly. You know, they're unconscious or in a coma or something. So they would bury people and then put a little tie inside the coffin to a little bell that was outside the grave, and they would pull it if they woke up in their coffin, and that bell would signify, I'm still alive, come and get me. And also when there was the plague, people used to ring a bell saying, bring out your dead, because nobody wanted to be outside unless they had to. It was a bit like COVID. You didn't want to be outside unless you had to and mixing with other people. So when the cart came along, the bell ringing was a sign to either all get back in your houses, because I'm bringing loads of dead infected people around near you. And also, if you've got any dead people in your homes, now come and put them on the lorry and I'll take them through. Now's the time to do it, kind of thing. So that ringing bell being a symbol of doom is literally the sound of death. So that's why a bell signifies that. Tone is the creation of mood in a text, such as sadness, gloom, celebration, joy, anxiety, dissatisfaction, regret, or anger. Different elements of writing can help to create these moods. For example, long sentences or verses with assonance, remember the pain in the ass, where it's the same sound in the middle, with assonance tend to create a sad, melancholic mood, but short syllabic alliterative lines can create an upbeat and pacey atmosphere. One of the quickest ways to identify tone, and we will get to this when we do our unseen poetry session, one of the quickest ways to identify this is by circling all the verbs. So as soon as you get a poem, circle all the verbs, and you'll get an idea of what happens throughout the poem without having to actually understand like the actual what's actually happening. It just gives you an idea of what's going on. Word choice or vocabulary. This can also be referred to as register. It refers to an author's choice of language. Authors may use words commonly associated with a certain subject, experience, or state of mind. So it's not just about them deciding where the grammar goes, particularly in poetry and in Shakespeare. Every single word has been specifically selected. Nothing is there by chance. It's not like they just go, oh, I just want to say, oh, there's a cloud over there. And I'll write, there's a cloud over there. They would write, there's a cloud over there, and then go, hang on a second. I might want to make the tone a bit more gloomy. So you might say something like, the cloud approached gloomily. That's a really rubbish sentence, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's that thing of like selecting the order of words, the choice of words. Why have they chosen a particular word rather than another? Try and think. So for example, this kind of goes back to tone and symbolism, but Lady Macbeth says, look like be like the serpent, but look, hang on, be the serpent, but look like the innocent flower under it. It's words to that effect anyway. I can't remember the exact quote right now, but she's basically saying, you are the serpent, but look like you're all innocence and you're all lovely. And the fact that Shakespeare chose the word serpent relates to, obviously, as it said earlier, the Garden of Eden, temptation, evil, all those biblical associations. And the examiners love that. If you can find anything that does indicate, don't put it in there if it's not there. Don't try and make it work if it's not there. But if you do notice anything to do with snakes or anything like that, or any heavenly kind of allusions to like white or clouds or heavens or cherubs, angels, that kind of thing, then that can definitely be part of symbolism. Going back to, just as a sideline, going back to white, white is also known as a symbol of hope. So although it's definitely seen as innocence, if you have a white dove, for example, particularly a white dove, again, it's reference to another biblical story where Noah sent a dove to go and find land, and it came back with a branch. And that's why the dove is the symbol of hope for a lot of people and in a lot of cultures, because obviously the Bible alludes to that. So it's only if the dove is mentioned though, but again, white can still signify hope, but definitely innocence. So as we're on to word choice, I'm just going to stop sharing with you now, and we are going to go on to our ambitious vocabulary. So now this does say in the mark scheme, which we will get to, GCSE ambitious vocabulary. So all I'm doing is typing it into Google, and it comes up with lots of different options and lots of different lists, but there is a kind of a given list that seems to be something that is kind of seen as the main words that they want in there. So here are 100 of them. My advice would be pick 5 and learn them, and try and find ways to get them into your essays. So if you've got, for example, abhor means hate, amiable means friendly. So you could say, when you're talking about Lady Macbeth saying, that's the quote, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. That's it. That's the quote. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. So this shows that Lady Macbeth is encouraging Macbeth to appear amiable, but actually have the mentality of an evil serpent, something which society in that time would absolutely abhor, absolutely hate, because of their fear of the afterlife and their Christian religious beliefs. That would be a cracking sentence. You've got 2 of your ambitious vocabularies options sort of pushed in there, which is great, but they make sense and they add to the sentence. Brazen means kind of like it's kind of like brave, but brazen is more like cheeky, daring, kind of like if you're brazen, it's like you don't care what people think, you know, you're just out there, this is me, don't care. Cajole is a great one, especially for if you're doing Macbeth, for Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. So she cajoles him into killing Duncan by using many of her womanly wiles. So things like manipulation. She attacks his masculinity by saying, you would be so much more the man, which means not only you'd be more manly, but also you'd be you'd have a higher status as well in society, not just more manly to me, but then you'd also be higher status in society. So she cajoles him with all these different ways, and then she says she uses the promise. So she says basically, I know what it's like to love my own baby, and I would kill my own baby if I promised, like you've promised me, to kill Duncan. And then she uses, what's the other one she does? From this time, such I account thy love, she says. So she's saying, from this moment now decides and tells me whether I love you or not, or how much you love me. Okay, so it doesn't matter about anything else. This moment here is what tells me how much you love me. So that is really tough, really harsh. And she's using all those different techniques to cajole him into killing Duncan, which is what she wants him to do. Candor is honesty. Chide, tell someone off. So Mr. Burling in an Inspector Calls chides Eric. Can't remember the quote for this one, but he does kind of tell him off every now and again. He definitely chides him for stealing the money. He does him off for that, which I don't blame him for. Coherent means clear and understanding. So if you're describing an idea of symbolism, for example, and saying the let's look at the alliteration. So the S sounds in Bayonet Charge, the poem, create a sound of bullets, or suggest the sound of bullets, which helps the coherence of the reader with regards to experiencing the sound of bullets. So you could put that in there. Or the author's ideas are very coherent because they make it so clear when they're describing the sounds of the bullets. You know, there are different ways you can put that in. Complacency, I'm not going through every word, I'm just picking some out at random. Complacency, a bit lazy, can't really be bothered. So if you show that you're complacent, it's this that Lady Macbeth kind of accuses Macbeth of. She sort of says, you know, has it grown so sickly then? She says something like that, doesn't she? Like basically how he was all ambition and all let's do it, let's kill the king, and then he's become a bit like, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm just quite happy with my awards and my Thane of Glamis and Thane of Cawdor. Has he become, does she think he's become a bit complacent? Maybe. Connive, oh, that's a good word. Conniving. If you are conniving, it means you plan to be evil. A fox would typically be seen as a conniving animal. Lady Macbeth is conniving. She is intentionally pre-planning and then implementing things to make bad things happen. It's an underhand way of making things happen. Excuse me. So yeah, conniving is a really great word. Cynical kind of means doubtful or suspicious. If you're cynical of religion, you probably don't really believe in God or heaven or hell or anything like that. But it doesn't mean you absolutely don't believe. It's like if you're cynical, it's like, jury's out on that one, but I'm not quite sure I believe that. It's that kind of thing. Let's go down. Empathy, I think you all know. Let's have a look. Fabricate. So if you make something up, you wouldn't use this in relation to, so for example, a poet doesn't fabricate a poem. They don't make it up. It's fabricate is more like it's more like a dishonest kind of thing. If you fabricate something, it's like being you fabricate a lie, or you fabricate a story to be your alibi or something like that. It's that kind of thing. That's kind of where fabricate comes from. Gluttony is greed, specifically around food. Gratuitous is a great word to use. So for example, in the poem that we were talking about just now with all the repetition, so we're talking about London, every cry of every man in every, whatever it is, I can't remember what the other things are off the top of my head, but it's everything. There are four. And you could say, I think it's William Blake. So you would say Blake's gratuitous use of the word every indicates that he wants to emphasize the fact that nobody escapes this turmoil. Yeah, so that gratuitous just means a lot of. It's like almost excessive, almost over the top. So if you want to use the word excessive or too much, gratuitous is the word that you want to get in there. That's really good. Let's see, implicit. Well, I'm sure you've used this a lot, but there are every meaning in pretty much in a poem is implicit. But if you look at the themes in different books, and different texts, they will tell you what is the implicit meaning. So for example, in Of Mice and Men, it is implicit that the depression is causing a lack of jobs, which is what increases the fear among all the workers because they're so desperate to keep their jobs, to stay alive, basically. So that is implicit. There isn't an explicit, which is the opposite, open way of saying, oh, well, it's because of the depression, Curly's wife said. That doesn't happen. What else could be implicit? Try and think. The inspector is quite implicit in his meanings when he starts talking about different people's relationships with Eva. So he implies, that's where that word comes from. So the inspector implies that they all have something to do with Eva's death before he actually explicitly says what it is. He's kind of hinting. Implicit means it's kind of hint, it's kind of suggested. Meticulous. Meticulous is a great word to use, and meticulous shows it basically means very, it's almost like pedantic. It means very detailed. So you could use this would be a really good word to use if you're talking about the selection of vocabulary. So if a poet has used the word black, for example, just off the top of my head, you could say the poet's meticulous selection of dark and hellish words such as black, and then maybe some other words that are in there, indicate that we are being encouraged to feel down, depressed, angry, frightened. Depends on what the theme of the poem is, but it's the meticulous selection. So it's not just a selection. They're not just choosing the vocabulary, they're choosing it meticulously, which means extremely carefully. So that's a really good word to use for when you're talking about your poetry. Novice, someone who's new to it. So it could be that, for example, and I'm using a lot of Macbeth allusions here, so apologies for that, but you can apply this in any way. This is just to give you some ideas. So in a way, Macbeth is a novice murderer because although he kills for a living because he's a soldier, he knows that when he goes on the battlefield, he's risking his own life, but so does everyone else on the battlefield who's his enemy. So it's an equal pairing. It's, you all know what you're in for. You all know what you're there for. everyone's on a level playing field, kind of, you know, the odds are the same. Whereas when it's an old man asleep in his bed, vulnerable, and you're a trained soldier who's trained to kill and he's staying in your house, then you are very clearly murdering one person without anybody else, without the instruction or the honor of doing it for your country. You're doing it for personal gain on your own without instruction. So in that sense, it's the first time that he does as he wants, as he chooses. Or you could argue that Lady Macbeth has instructed him, but she hasn't. She's cajoled him into doing it. It's slightly different. She hasn't said, you go and kill the king now. That hasn't happened. So she's like, you know, I think we should. I think, don't you think we should? You know. So he is a novice. That took a very long time for me to explain that, but he is a novice to murder, which could be why he then, after that, pays hitmen to go and kill Banquo and Fleance. He also sends people to go and kill Macduff's family. He doesn't do it himself. He does Duncan, and that's the last time he does it. So perhaps it's the fact that he's a novice at murder. That's why he makes the mistake. He comes out covered in blood. And Lady Macbeth's like, what on earth are you doing? You were meant to wipe the blood on the grooms to make it look like their guilt. And he's like, oh, I couldn't cope with it. They woke up and it all went wrong. And she's like, give him here, I'll go and do it. And off she trots and she wipes the blood on them. And that's another way that it shows that he is a novice murderer. He is it's the first time he's done it. He's not experienced. Oblivious means you're not aware. So we definitely cannot say that Macbeth is oblivious to the benefits of being king, for example. And none of them are oblivious to anything in that play, apart from Duncan. Duncan is oblivious to Macbeth's evil intentions. What else have we got here? Let's do one more. I'm trying to think what I can apply. Rash is quite a good word, actually, and it's not too difficult. It's not difficult to spell or anything like that, and it doesn't mean a rash on your skin. It does mean if you're rash, it means you do something without thinking. So the murder of Duncan is not rash. It's premeditated, it's planned, it's very thought out and executed very methodically, or planned to be anyway. When he, as a soldier, goes rushing in, so I don't know if you remember, but in the beginning of the play, he has just gone in, and Macbeth and Banquo are going into this massive fight where basically they're completely outnumbered, and their success is doubtful, as the I think it's the sergeant, certainly one of the soldiers, comes in and tells the king. That's quite rash, because it says they go in and they slaughter everybody. He brandishes his sword and they slaughter everybody until they get to the villain, and before he has a chance to even speak, they slit him from the navel to the chops, and behead him and put it on the battlements. That could be seen as rash, although that has been planned with regard to the fact that it's a war. The action itself, in that moment, Macbeth and Banquo had the option of, do we run or do we just go rah, and give it all we've got? And they go crazy, and that's quite rash. It's that moment of, right, just doing it. And that's what rash is. So I hope that's given you quite a few words there. And what I will do is I'm just going to copy this link so that I can put it in the chat. Where's the chat? Here it is. So that you have that there. And if you can't access that, then just let me know and I will send that to your parents so you can get hold of it. So yeah, so that is our ambitious vocabulary, and you want to be putting that in as much as you can without it looking like you're just trying to put it in for marks. You want to get it in there. It's just like embedding your quotes. You want to make sure you're getting it in there so that it flows nice and easily. You don't have to have every other word like that. If you could do one or two of those, what they call the ambitious vocabulary words, if you can put one or two of those in each paragraph, you're golden. That's all you need. You just need to demonstrate that you know how to do that, how to put them in, what they mean, are they spelt correctly? And that's part of your technical accuracy part. So I'm just going to have a look at what is here, because next we've got our literature model answers and mark schemes.